Okay, so climate change,
Yeah.
it feels like it's kind of everywhere these days.
Right.
In the news, on social media,
Absolutely.
even sometimes you hear like family members talking about it.
For sure.
And honestly, it can feel a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
But in this deep dive, we're going to like cut through the noise
Yeah, that's the goal.
and bring you the key insights you really need.
Exactly.
And we found like a fantastic source to help us do that.
Okay, great.
So it's a YouTube video, and it's called Climate Change and Global Warming Explained by NDTV.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
Have you seen this one?
Yeah.
And they're like the masters of making complex topics easy to grasp,
Totally.
which is perfect for this deep dive, right?
Absolutely.
So before we jump into like all the details,
Yeah.
can you give us a quick rundown of how the video defines these two terms?
Sure.
So climate change and global warming.
Yeah. So global warming first,
Yeah.
as the name kind of suggests, is all about the overall increase in the Earth's average temperature.
Yeah.
So think of it like taking your planet's temperature
Okay.
and seeing that number kind of go up over time.
Right.
Climate change is the broader term.
Okay.
That encompasses all those long-term shifts
Uh-huh.
in weather patterns
Yeah.
that we see as a direct result of that warming.
Okay.
So it's about the bigger picture,
Okay.
the changes in rainfall,
Yeah.
the intensity of storms,
Yeah.
the shifting seasons.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about things getting hotter.
It's not just about the heat.
Right.
No.
Right.
It's how those rising temperatures are affecting everything else on the planet.
Everything else.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the video really highlights the role that humans have played
Okay.
in this warming trend,
Uh-huh.
especially since the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
We've seen this massive spike in carbon dioxide emissions,
Yeah.
or CO2,
Uh-huh.
and it's only accelerated after World War II.
Oh, wow.
So think about it. The world population has tripled since the 1950s, which means way more demand for energy.
Right.
And unfortunately, much of that energy still comes from burning fossil fuels,
Of course. Yeah.
which release CO2 into the atmosphere.
So more people, more energy needs.
Exactly.
More CO2.
Yep.
Okay.
And that brings us to the greenhouse effect.
Right.
The greenhouse effect.
Right. I know we've all heard that term.
Yes.
Can you remind us how it actually works?
Yeah, refresh my memory.
Okay. So it's actually a natural process
Okay.
that's essential for life on Earth.
Okay.
The sun's energy reaches our planet,
Uh-huh.
and some of it gets reflected back into space.
Right?
But certain gases in the atmosphere, like CO2,
Yes.
act
Yeah.
like a blanket,
Okay.
trapping some of that heat,
Uh-huh.
keeping the planet warm enough to support life.
Yeah.
The problem is we've added so much extra CO2 to the atmosphere
Okay.
that we've essentially thickened that blanket,
Okay.
trapping even more heat than we should be.
So like turning up the thermostat
Exactly.
on our giant Earth house. Yeah, like we've got the heat cranked up too high.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the video points out a pretty sobering fact.
Okay.
The average global temperature has already risen by at least 1.1 degrees Celsius
Okay.
since pre-industrial time.
So since pre-industrial times,
Yeah.
1.1 degrees.
Yeah, you might think, okay, 1.1 degrees, that's not so bad.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a lot.
But the reality is even this seemingly small increase is already having a major impact on the planet,
Oh, wow.
especially in sensitive regions like the Arctic.
Okay, I'm starting to see how even small changes can have big consequences.
For sure.
Can you tell us more about what's happening in the Arctic?
Yeah.
And how it's all connected to rising sea levels?
Absolutely. So as the Earth warms, the Arctic ice melts
Right.
at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
And here's where that house analogy comes back into play.
Okay.
As that ice melts, it exposes darker ocean water underneath,
Mm-hmm.
which absorbs even more heat from the sun.
Okay.
It's like swapping a white roof for a black one.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You can trap a lot more heat.
Right.
And all that melted ice has to go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It flows into the oceans, causing sea levels to rise around the world.
And that image of a bathtub overflowing really stuck with me from the video.
Yeah, it's a good one. It doesn't take much extra water to start causing problems.
Exactly. And one of the most startling facts from the video is that average sea levels have risen over 8 inches
8 inches.
since 1880.
Wow.
But here's the really concerning part.
Okay.
1/3 of that entire rise,
Uh-huh.
a full 3 inches, has occurred in just the last 25 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how rapidly things are changing.
That is alarming.
Yeah.
That really highlights the urgency of this issue.
Yeah, sure.
And the video goes even further.
Okay.
connecting those rising sea levels to seemingly unrelated events,
Okay.
like the rising cost of wheat in India.
Interesting.
Can you explain how those two things are linked?
It might seem like a stretch at first.
But it all comes down to how climate change disrupts these interconnected systems we were talking about.
Okay.
So changes in rainfall patterns
Yeah.
caused by that warming planet
Right.
can lead to droughts in some areas, while other areas experience more intense flooding.
So like a really uneven distribution.
Exactly.
Okay.
This, of course, affects crop yields.
Yeah.
And when a staple crop like wheat is impacted,
Mm-hmm.
it has a ripple effect on supply and demand,
Yeah.
driving up prices,
Okay.
sometimes even across the globe.
So it's like a giant domino effect.
Exactly.
With one event triggering another and another.
Yeah, it's a chain reaction.
It really highlights the complex web of connections we're dealing with here.
For sure.
And the video points out that the Paris Agreement
Yeah,
aims to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
that's the goal.
But we're already at 1.1.
Yeah, that's right.
So are we on track to meet that goal?
It's a good question.
And what happens if we don't?
Well, that's a great question and a perfect segue into the next part of our discussion.
All right.
Let's take a closer look at the Paris Agreement,
Yeah.
its goals, and the potential consequences of exceeding that 1.5 degree threshold.
So we're already at 1.1 degrees of warming.
Right.
And the Paris Agreement aims to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Can you unpack that agreement a little bit for me? Like, what are the goals?
So the Paris Agreement is a landmark international treaty.
Okay.
It's a commitment from nearly every country in the world
Wow.
to reduce greenhouse gas emissions
Okay.
and limit global warming
Right.
to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably to 1.5 degrees,
Okay.
compared to pre-industrial levels.
So the lower we can keep the warming, the better.
Exactly.
But the video doesn't sugarcoat things.
Right.
It clearly states that
Yeah.
even hitting that 1.5 degree target could have some serious consequences.
Unfortunately.
What are some of the things they highlight?
Well, the video touches on how exceeding 1.5 degrees could lead to more extreme weather events,
Okay.
like hurricanes, droughts, and floods.
More intense and more frequent.
Exactly.
Okay.
We could see significant sea level rise,
Uh-huh.
which would displace millions of people living in coastal areas.
Millions.
Yeah, and there's a real risk of losing vital ecosystems like coral reefs.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
But the video does offer, like, a glimmer of hope, right?
Yeah.
It's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all.
It suggests that we can still avoid the worst of these consequences if we take action now.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway.
Okay, so what does that action look like?
Right.
What are some of the things the video suggests we can do?
Well, the video emphasizes the importance of transitioning to renewable energy sources.
Okay,
Think solar, wind, and geothermal.
gotcha.
We need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels as quickly as possible.
Right.
And it highlights the need for innovation in areas like carbon capture and storage, technologies that can actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere.
So it's about shifting our energy systems, but it's also about finding ways to deal with the CO2 that's already up there.
That's right. We've got to address both sides of the equation.
And the video doesn't just focus on large-scale solutions.
No, it doesn't.
It also encourages viewers to consider individual actions.
Absolutely.
Like simple things like reducing energy consumption at home,
Right.
choosing more sustainable transportation options,
Sure.
and even being mindful of the food we eat.
Yeah, all of those things can make a difference.
That's an important point.
Yeah.
It can feel overwhelming
Oh, absolutely.
to think about tackling a global problem like climate change.
Yeah, I get that.
But it's encouraging to know that our individual choices can actually contribute to the solution.
I think that's really empowering.
And speaking of individual choices,
Yeah.
I'm curious, what has stood out to you the most from this video and our conversation so far?
That's a good question. I think what's fascinating to me is how the video manages to connect the dots between these seemingly unrelated events.
Okay.
Like the link between melting Arctic ice and rising wheat prices in India.
Right. Yeah.
It underscores just how interconnected our world truly is,
Yeah.
and how actions in one part of the world can have far-reaching consequences elsewhere.
It's like we're all part of this giant complex system.
Exactly.
And what we do impacts everyone else.
Right.
Whether we realize it or not.
It's a powerful realization.
It really drives home the point that climate change isn't some distant threat.
Yeah.
It's already affecting us all in profound ways.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a critical point.
Okay.
We often hear about the catastrophic impacts of climate change.
Right.
But the video makes it clear that it's not just about surviving those impacts.
Okay.
It's also about thriving
Thriving.
in a changing world.
That's an interesting way to frame it.
Yeah, I think it's an important shift in perspective.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Sure. Think about it this way.
Okay.
Addressing climate change isn't just about preventing bad things from happening.
Okay.
It's also about creating a more sustainable and resilient future for everyone.
Okay.
It's about investing in clean energy, protecting our natural resources, and building communities that are better prepared to adapt
Yeah.
to the changes that are already underway.
So it's about looking beyond the immediate crisis
Right.
and seeing the potential for positive change.
Exactly.
For a future that's not just sustainable, but actually better than what we have now.
I think that's the goal.
Okay, so it's not about giving up
Right.
or resigning ourselves to like a bleak future.
Definitely not.
It's about recognizing the challenges,
Uh-huh.
but also embracing the opportunities that come with tackling them head on.
I love that.
I think that's a powerful message.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect segue into our final thoughts for our listeners.
Okay, great.
Are you ready to leave them with something to ponder
Sure.
as we wrap up this deep dive? So we've talked
Okay.
about
Yeah, we have.
the science of climate change, the urgency of the situation, and the potential for positive change.
Right.
If there was like one thing you could leave our listener with
Yeah.
to really mull over,
Right.
what would it be?
Let me think.
Yeah.
Well, the video sparked a question for me.
Okay.
It highlighted how melting Arctic ice can lead to higher wheat prices in India,
Right. Yeah.
which got me thinking, what other seemingly unrelated events are being influenced by climate change right now?
It's a really good question.
Maybe without us even realizing it.
Yeah. It's like we're only just beginning to understand
Right.
the ripple effects of this massive shift
Yeah,
in our planet's systems.
absolutely. And it
Right.
makes you realize that climate change isn't just this abstract concept happening out there somewhere.
Right.
It's woven into the fabric of our daily lives,
Yeah, for sure.
even if we don't always see those direct connections.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're challenging you to take that question with you.
Yeah, think about it.
As you go about your day, consider this.
Yeah.
How might climate change be influencing the things you encounter,
Right.
the choices you make,
For sure.
or even the conversations you have?
Yeah, it's a constant process of learning and adapting.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
The more we understand about climate change, the better equipped we'll be to navigate its challenges
Yeah,
and contribute to meaningful solutions.
exactly.
So keep asking questions, keep learning,
Yeah.
and keep the conversation going.
It's so important.
Because ultimately, the future of our planet depends on all of us working together to create a more sustainable and thriving world.
I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah, I think so too.